Welcome everyone, and I'm going to begin by inviting Keith Simmons, the minister at Duncan United Church, to begin with a territorial acknowledgement.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you all for joining us here on the unceded territory of Cowichan Tribes. Is where I'm coming to you from, but the riding of Cowichan Malahat Langford encompasses several folk from the Coast Salish community: Didadat and Malahat First Nation, Halalt, Penalakat, Pachidat, Lake Cowichan, and Cowichan peoples who have taken the time to teach us in this place and in many other places throughout the riding about their traditions, about the way of living in integration and relationship with the land, about how we can be part of our relations and still support and be in community with one another, both human and non-human relations. It's been good lessons to learn, particularly from the Cowichan tribes whose elders I learned from, and to learn and reflect on their ancestral traditions of love, generosity, kindness, and respect. And to think how we might bring those traditions together in a way that helps us grow the solutions that we need to the problems that we're facing, both in climate and income distribution. And I'm very happy to be part of this conversation between folk who occupy different parts of the circle. But as the elders teach us, we can still listen to one another and together advance and perhaps bring about a new world for our children who perhaps don't deserve so much the one that we might be leaving them now. Well, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to bring to life the reality of the presence of those folk who are still colonized, as perhaps we all are, in this land.
Aichka, thank you, Keith.
Good to see you.
The wonderful Zoom phenomena of, oh dear, there I am muted again. I am very pleased to introduce our debate moderator, Brenda Keeks. Brenda's been a resident of the Cowichan Valley since 1992, minus a few years for working away. She is the proud matriarch of a blended family of 6. Some of you may know her now adult children and their significant others who continue to work as professionals in social services, healthcare, and education across this region. Brenda's career as a community development practitioner and mediator was spent entirely at the intersection of tonight's debate, seeking ways to address the challenges and opportunities inherent in the spaces that exist between conservation and the economy. For her contributions to the fields of forestry, fisheries, climate, and community economic development, Brenda's work earned her a Premier's Award for Community Service, a Clean 50 Canada designation, and a Fellowship Award from the Banff School of Innovation. Most recently, Brenda can be found growing food, raising goats and grandchildren, and building community in Maple Bay. She remains deeply committed to and engaged with social justice, volunteering, environmental sustainability, and the consensus-based decision-making process, offering her expertise from time to passion projects that demonstrate the courage and creativity to tackle much needed change, as we will be discussing this evening. Welcome, Brenda.
Thanks, Jane. Good evening, everyone. Tonight's All Candidates debate is being brought to you by 100debates.ca and Green PAC, which is Canada's only non-partisan, non-profit organization working to build environmental leadership and government action on the environment. This is the second federal election for which 100 Debates has organized the opportunity for candidates across the nation to address their constituents on these important issues. The debate is being hosted locally by Cowichan Valley United Churches and Langford residents with the purpose of making the environment an issue here that no party and no candidate can ignore. We are welcoming as many as 120 people who've registered to participate tonight. While you will while the people who are with us will not be seen or heard due to the vagaries of this thing we're now living in called Zoom world, their presence is exactly why we're meeting this evening. The local candidates from the 4 parties that had sitting MPs in the last parliament were invited to speak with you tonight. We have with us Alistair McGregor for the New Democratic Party, Blair Herbert for the Liberal Party, and Leah Versible for the Green Party. Alana DeLong, the Conservative candidate for this riding, had another commitment this evening and was unable to attend. The format of the debate includes 9 questions that have been provided by 100 debates. These questions are being asked across Canada in similar forums today and this evening. Following these questions, I'm going to pose 5 additional questions that were solicited in advance from residents in this riding. As the people who are listening to this debate tonight, you're welcome to submit additional questions using the chat function at the bottom of your screen if you wish. And if we have time for additional questions at the end of the evening, we'll review those and see if we can pull a couple to the fore for these folks to answer on your behalf. The event is being recorded and it's live on Facebook as well tonight. So just so you know, this is a recorded event. And I have 3 points of order as moderator. The candidates, I believe, have received these already in advance of tonight, but I'll just say them again. The first one is please keep to the response time for each question. Jane up in the corner is going to have a 15-second card, and she will raise that if you're getting pretty close to the end and give you just a few seconds to wrap up your final thought. We're going to have to be really tight on that one because there's a lot of questions to go through. The second is please stay on the topic of the question that's being posed. And the third is please, I mean, I have no concerns about this, but please act respectfully with each other. Throughout the debate, I'm going to be asking candidates in random order to address each question. So I will be switching it up just to keep you on your toes. So let's begin. The introductory question is this. You have agreed to join us this evening to talk about the environment and climate change. Why is this subject important to you in your campaign to become our MP? And I'll give each of you 1.5 minutes. Talk fast. Blair, could you start for us, please?
Sure, thanks, Brenda. My name is Blair Herbert. I am the Liberal candidate in the Cowichan Langford. I live and work and farm in the Cowichan Valley. And I'm running in this election as I ran in the last election in 2019 with 2 priorities, the environment and the economy. I believe these 2 priorities are not mutually exclusive, and we cannot invest in the economy at the expense of the environment or vice versa. Both must move forward together, and I believe that that is possible. I'm proud to be running under the banner of the Liberal Party because they are the only party with a real plan for the climate. Just recently, the former Green Party leader of BC, Andrew Weaver, endorsed the Liberal plan, stating that it was both bold and thoughtful, and the only credible science-aligned plan of any of the major parties. Liberal climate plan covers 64 points and pledges $100 billion towards climate action. If you're interested in a copy, I would certainly like to send you one. This is what has driven me to federal politics, and that's really why I'm here today. It's the economy and the climate, and I want to see some more progress on the climate. We have done lots in the last 6 years, and we need to do more. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Blair. Blair, you are breaking up a bit. I don't know if it's just me on my end or if it's yours, but if you have a kind of Wi-Fi thing. So are other people experiencing a breakup with Blair? Yeah. So anyway, just to let you know, we could hear you, but it was breaking up a bit. Okay. Leah, could I ask you to answer the question? Do you need me to repeat it or are you okay?
I think I'm okay, thank you.
Okay,
In the interest of time, I'll barge ahead.
Good.
My name is Leah Versabel, and many of you know that I've run locally in provincial elections in the last 2 provincial elections for the Green Party. And I also ran in the CVRD elections a few years ago, 3 years ago. And I was a nominee in the last federal election campaign as well. I have been fighting this fight for the climate for at least 30 years. I became a member of the Green Party of Canada 10 years ago because I believe that this is the critical issue that we all face. And now, as not only a mom of adult kids, but a grandmother of 3 kids living in various parts of the world, I see very clearly how climate is affecting each and every one of us. I know that this is a time for crucial action, and I honestly believe that we cannot continue to have people in Parliament who do not speak out and do not speak up and give all of their energy to the role that is invested in them as a representative for the local people. This is an important time. Either way, I'll stop.
either way, I'll stop. Okay. Thanks, Leah.
That's
You
okay,
gotta
Jane,
get-
don't
You
worry.
gotta get your cards right there, Jane. This stopped her in mid-sentence. Alistair, are you okay with the question? You need me to repeat it?
Yeah, no, I think I got the gist. Thank you, Brenda.
Okay, good.
So yeah, I mean, climate change on a personal level, it's always factored very heavily on me because, you know, I'm lucky enough to be a father, and, you know, I have 9-year-old twins. I have a third one who's almost 4 years old. And, you know, when you see all of the evidence of what's happening around us, not only here in our local community, but across the province, across Canada, and indeed in many parts of the world, you know, it makes you think about the future you're leaving behind for your own children and for their friends and for children in all communities right across this land. And, you know, for those of you who know me or who have followed my work, I mean, you've probably often seen me refer to climate change as the single greatest challenge we have in this 21st century. Every other challenge is linked to it or is dwarfed by it. And, you know, if we don't make those types of investments now, the further we let this problem go, the greater the ecological, societal, and economic costs that will result from it. So we are at this pivotal moment. We are in the most critical decade. We are at a point in time where we have several paths open to us, and depending on what path we embark upon, they will all have very different consequences. So I'm very much in a favor of that real action now and producing the results that we all need to see as a country.
Thank you. Okay, thanks all very much for those first opening thoughtful remarks. The next 9 questions are going to focus on how you, if elected, would contribute towards solving the environmental and climate challenges that you so eloquently spoke about. When you answer these questions, we're asking for you to go beyond stating what your party has done or will do, and at least in your initial responses, to avoid talking about what other parties are or are not doing. You're each going to have 2 minutes, so a little bit more time to answer these questions. The first set of questions will be focused on our global climate crisis. Your setup for this question is this. The International Panel on Climate Change has declared a code red for the planet and says that future climate impacts require immediate and all-inclusive action. Any remaining doubts about our climate crisis were settled for Canadians during these past months with the scorching heat dome, 600 climate-related deaths, widespread drought, flooding, extreme wildfire fires, and the world's worst air pollution recorded in Vancouver. Yet in 2020, the Government of Canada announced at least $18 billion in subsidies and public financing for the oil and gas sector. The first question is, if elected, will you advocate for all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make that required law. So Leah, I will ask you to take that question first, please.
Thank you for that question. And I could cut to the chase and really just answer yes on the first 7 questions or so, but I'll elaborate a little bit more. Yes, and even sooner is my response. Canada has never yet achieved a climate target. In fact, we are now one of the top 3 worst per capita greenhouse gas emitters in the G20. This is not a position that we should be proud of. And yet we continue to subsidize oil and gas at an exorbitant rate. We have known for a long, long time that this is not the way forward. I started divesting myself in my pension plans and other investments over 15 years ago from all oil and gas. And while in 2008, that was a disaster, of course, there was a world economic slowdown and many people lost a lot of money. I am okay with that. If this is something that has to happen, and I truly believe that it must, to save not only ourselves, but future generations, then yes, this is the way forward. Our party has released its platform yesterday, and I know that you wanted to hear my view, but I would also like to say that we are planning to increase carbon taxes by $25 per ton each year from 2022 forward. This is a critical point. Code Red does not leave us time to kick this can down the road to 2050.
Thanks, Leah. Alistair, could I ask you to take the question next, please?
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. So in our platform, we have made a commitment to reduce our emissions by at least 50%. So I want to underline that word "at least" because you're asking us to go above and beyond what our party platforms are offering. And I think that 60% will be important. I think like during election times and even during the day-to-day back and forth of the House of Commons, you hear lots of promises. And I think what's important is we need a mechanism or an office set up to make sure those promises are held to account. We are already well served in our parliamentary system through independent officers of parliament. For example, we have the Auditor General's office and the Ethics Commissioner. They are important offices that provide that sort of nonpartisan reporting to Canadians free of any political interference. So one of the proposals that we have set up is to set up a climate accountability office which would directly report to Canadians on the federal government's progress. So they're providing that unvarnished truth about whether a new Democratic government federally is actually holding up to the promises it made during the 2021 campaign. You talked, part of the question is actually asking about like what we can do to make sure various sectors are playing their part. For the last 3.5 years, I have been serving as our party's agriculture critic. We know that agriculture is responsible for a lot of emissions, but there are ways in which we can retool the sector. And I'm proud to have played a part through my private member's bill in trying to establish a national soil strategy. I think that's going to be really important in encouraging regenerative methods of agriculture and really turning our farms into huge carbon sequestration potential. So there's many different areas where we can work together, but a very important question. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Blair, over to you.
Thanks, Brenda. I think our targets are not quite at 60%. What we have set as a target in 2020 was 40 to 45% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions over 2005 by 2030, and we have a plan in place that will get us there. I think one of the most, we can all throw out targets, but do we have a plan in order to make those things achievable? And what we have, I think, is a reasonable, realistic, and most importantly, achievable target that we have a plan to get to. Personally, I would like to see our country exceed those targets as we have, but in order for that to happen, we have to get a lot more buy-in from the public than what we're getting right now. To date, you know, right as we speak, we have about 54,000 electric vehicles in the province of BC, out of 3.7 million vehicles. So 98.5% of the vehicles that we are driving in this province are powered by fossil fuels. So what we need is for the people in the province and in the country and in fact in the world to start making different choices. That is going to get us to where we have to go. And part of the problem with this is that, you know, I had some friends of mine that bought new cars here in the last couple of years, and I asked them, you know, what their thought process was and whether they considered an electric car or some type of alternate fuel source vehicle. And no, they hadn't. In fact, it was not on their radar at all. And what we need to do is change the thinking of our population to make these things a normal part of your choice, that you would consider these things. So we have a long way to go, but we are on track to 40% by 2030.
Thanks, Blair. Second question, folks. Will you advocate for a ban on all new fossil fuel extraction projects? Alistair, can you take that one for us?
Yes, this is a time for us to be bold. And for those of you who came to my office the week before RIT drop, you'll probably know that I was there to sign the pledge, and I am committed to honoring that pledge. I think that, you know, this is really a time for us to, you know, listen to and understand the science and what science has been trying to tell us about man-made climate change. We are in the year 2021. We are in the most critical decade. The IPCC has been telling us for years now that we must change our ways. And so for us to engage in explorations that will extract more fossil fuels with all of that evidence around us is just madness. And so, you know, trying to extract more fossil fuels, even just expanding the infrastructure that is designed to transport them, we have to face the facts that we are in a climate emergency. And for those of, you know, for people who like to rely on the economic side of the argument, I go back to what I said during my opening statement. If we do not change our ways, the economic costs of climate change will continue to mount. Because I know many Canadians are worried about the economy, and particularly what the economy of the future will hold. We have to understand that, you know, a healthy economy is very much dependent on a healthy environment. It is the junior partner in this relationship. And the longer that we don't take the necessary steps to get us off of fossil fuels, to redirect that money into financing a renewable energy economy of the future, the more costly it will be to future generations to fund that. So we have to understand, you know, how many tax dollars are we prepared to spend in the future? Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. And Leah, you got the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So the answer again is yes. Not only new projects, but we want to cancel all further progress on the Trans Mountain twinning project. We feel that this is a project that stands as an example of how terribly wrong things have gone under our current government. This morning on the CBC, we were listening to a number of 12.6 billion that we're now up to, and pushing dates further and further and further out for completion. That number was actually in the budget in February of last year for this project. It is now projected to be well over $20 billion for completion of that project, which is absolutely outrageous. We look at situations in Burnaby today where a person who has been protesting on the mountain for many, many months has, you know, felt that his life was endangered because trees were still being cut down. We hear from the people of the city of Burnaby who have been protesting further permits for this project, not only on the mountain, but also on the waterfront, saying now they're faced with another 6-month extension of 24/7 construction. This is just outrageous, not only in terms of a financial commitment, but also in terms of the hardship that this is causing on local communities. We know also that the expansion is going to affect us in our waterways and put our oceans and shorelines at risk. This is a time to ban all fossil fuel projects.
Thanks, Leah. The third question in this series, and Blair. Oh, Blair.
Forgot.
I'm sorry, I forgot Blair. I'm sorry, I'm checking off here. Go, Blair.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I might have been better off just letting this one go, to tell you the truth. But first of all, this is a provincial responsibility, and as is all across the country, the province is in a situation where they regulate what happens as far as these type of projects go. I think that I don't know that there is any project that is being proposed now as far as fossil fuel extraction, other than the giant project in the northern part that the NDP government is putting through with LNG. So it'd be interesting to see if how that will affect that, and the BC government is certainly full on with that, and we should probably have that conversation with them as opposed to federal candidates. But I still get back to the same thing. We're going through transition, right? We have over the next 30 years, we are going to transition off of an oil economy to a greener economy. Again, we still have 98.5% of the vehicles in this province run on fuel. That's the problem. If we were able to reduce that, we wouldn't need anything as far as pipelines and that sort of thing. I'll address the pipeline question later because it is one of the questions that comes up. But I think this is what happens. We have to be realistic about what we can do. We have to look at this climate thing as a global thing. I think one of the things that I agree with the LNG project is that it might help reduce a lot of the coal emissions out of China by using a cleaner fuel. So that is an offset to that, but that's where I'm at on that.
Okay, thanks, Blair. Okay, third question. I haven't forgotten anybody, right? Third question. There's only 3 of you. How can I be forgetting people? Will you push for the implementation of a Canada-wide ban on fracking? Leah, can you take this one, please?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know why anyone would think that fracking is a good thing. In fact, I recently bought another book. I keep buying these books. This is from a local author based on Vancouver Island and illustrates some of the absolute fallacies that are being promoted in terms of clean energy. Fracking, my kids used to think I was swearing when I said it, means a high pressure injection of water and sand and a chemical solution into drilled wells that absolutely fractures the earth to release gases. And this process in itself cannot in any way be imagined as clean. This is a filthy, filthy project. It's causing earthquakes. It's causing contamination of agricultural land. It is degrading water quality and everything that relies on water, all of us, the entire planet. It is a terrible solution that was promoted as long ago as the early century, because people thought that it was a solution for other countries, and a large part of our endeavors in this province were to open up markets across the Pacific Rim. Physicians, other medical professionals are telling us that the incidence of asthma and allergies and all kinds of breathing issues related to fracking are just not worth it. This is something we have to stop doing right away.
Thanks, Leah. Blair, could you answer the question on a ban on fracking, please?
Sure. I think we have the same problem with this question we had with the last question. It's a huge responsibility of the provincial government, and the last time we pushed the provincial governments was with the carbon tax. Of course, we didn't have to do that here in BC because we already have one, but we got hauled into court by all of the conservative premiers across the country to say that we didn't have the ability to do that, that was their jurisdiction. We couldn't do that. So that is a problem. But here in BC with the LNG projects in the north, with the BC NDP, that's a huge issue, right? And I don't think that a Liberal candidate for the federal government should be putting in a Canada-wide ban on fracking, because it's not just the oil businesses that use fracking. I have property that I have just north of Mill Bay, and when we were drilling a well 6 years ago for water, we went down 422 feet and only got about 2 gallons a minute. And the well driller said to me, "Do you want us to frack it?" And I said, "No, I'll pass on fracking. Thank you very much." But there is an effect there as well, that sometimes that this is a solution to not very much water being available, and that is an issue there. So it's not just an oil and gas thing. It is available for other purposes as well. And I still get back to this, that and this is what is moving the provincial government along, I guess, as well as money, is the fact that hopefully we can, with natural gas, we can lessen the emissions in the world because we can replace a lot of coal.
Thanks, Blair. Alistair, could you take that question on fracking, please?
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. I think, this question, it is important, I think, as Blair said, to acknowledge the fact that there is provincial jurisdiction involved in this. And so as contenders for being a federal MP, there's a limit to what the House of Commons can do. I mean, it is written in Section 92A that the provincial legislatures do have exclusive lawmaking capacity in relation to exploration for non-renewable resources. So that is an important consideration. That being said, though, the federal government does have two possible avenues. Protection of the environment is a valid federal criminal law power. And also in the peace, order, and good government clause of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has previously argued that national concern arguments can be used for the federal government to intervene if they believe that the situation is not being addressed appropriately by individual provincial legislatures, or if the issue is bigger than a single province can handle. See, the real issue here is, I think we can all understand that burning methane versus burning coal, if you just to hold a side-by-side comparison, yes, of course, the methane is going to burn cleaner. The problem with fracking, though, is the methane that doesn't get burned. It's the gas that escapes from those wells, because methane as a gas is many times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is, and that's the real concern with all of those wells throughout British Columbia and throughout Alberta, is that escaping methane gas and what that's doing to our upstream emissions. So yes, as a federal MP, within my constitutional and jurisdictional limits, I absolutely will advocate for an end to fracking. I think we need to make that transition to more renewable and carbon-free sources of energy.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay, thank you so much. Set up for your next question. A decade ago, Canada committed at the G7 to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, yet billions of public dollars continue to flow to the oil and gas sectors and new fossil fuel projects like LNG Canada. If elected, will you advocate for a federal commitment to end all government subsidies, public finance, and other fiscal supports for fossil fuels next year, including financial supports provided through Export Development Canada? Blair, let me poke you with this question.
Sure. You know, first of all, the Liberals have committed to getting rid of all oil subsidies by 2023. But I think this number of $18 billion is disingenuous. There's a number of these grants or oil subsidies to the oil industry that I don't feel are subsidies to the oil industry at all. When you were, we subsidize, as in the federal government, I guess, subsidizes diesel for northern communities, Aboriginal communities, so they don't, basically freeze in the dark all winter. That's not a subsidy to the oil and gas industry. I don't feel that's a subsidy to those First Nations communities. And, we had back in 2020, the federal government gave $1.5 billion to the Western provinces, as in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba, to cap abandoned oil wells in their provinces, because as Alistair was just talking about, these things leak methane, and we have that, and that is a problem. Methane is a bad greenhouse gas, and so that doesn't seem to me either to be a subsidy to the oil industry. That is a subsidy to keep some trained people working by closing down and doing environmental work in the oil fields. We also had a wage subsidy in 2020 to, as opposed to putting all the people that were laid off out of the oil industry in Alberta, instead of them all collecting unemployment insurance, the oil industry was able to get the wage subsidy the same as every other industry. So that's a problem, and I think that when we really square that $18 billion down, it's nowhere close to $18 billion.
Thanks, Blair. Alistair, can you take the question next, please?
Sure. I think I'll talk a little bit more about the legislation part of it. The question mentioned Export Development Canada. We absolutely do support going to net zero target by reviewing all kinds of financial legislation, whether it be the Bank of Canada Act, the Export Development Canada Act, and even the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act. I think we need to look at all of the various federal statutes that the House of Commons and the Senate can amend to make sure that our country's financial goals are in line with the promises that are coming out of politicians' mouth. Let's actually see the actions follow up with the words that are uttered on this subject on a daily basis. At the beginning of this debate, you asked for us to go beyond what our party platforms were stating. So I'll give you a concrete example of something that I've done personally. It involves the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act. I've known for a long time that our Canada Pension Plan funds are invested around the world in many fossil fuel extraction companies, including companies like Gazprom, Coal India, and we have made billions of dollars off of this. And the Canada Pension Plan is incredibly important to retirees. But if we're going to be serious about this, we have to change financial behavior. And that's why I introduced a private member's bill that was going to amend the investment policies and procedures of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board to ensure that we were not investing in any entities that were causing human labor or environmental rights violations. And I think that, that's an important milestone that we need to achieve. Unfortunately, the vote on my bill wasn't successful, but at least we had an opportunity to talk about this very important issue. And I think it's something that we need to continue talking about and hopefully get action on in the years ahead.
Thank you. Leah.
Well, again, it would be easy to just say yes, unilaterally. My concern is largely about creative accounting, and sometimes when we think about subsidies, we don't break it down. A large part of these funds are going directly to companies that are extracting these fuels, and also to shareholders within those companies. And this really creates a false economy. This creates prices at the gas pump that are unrealistic. And though I'm not really excited about paying more and more and more for gas at the pump, I know that the vehicle that I'm driving is kept well tuned, and that I will keep it for as long as it possibly will last, to keep it out of the landfill. And then at some point, I am relying on universities and post-secondary education students to help us understand better ways of transporting not only goods and services, but also people. The requirement for cleaning up so many of these fossil fuel projects is also not seemingly laid at the feet of the companies, but at the feet of the taxpayers. And that's something that also has to be built into the equation long term. There was a mention of a transition of workers out of this industry into green jobs. And I think that that's another thing that we have to keep foremost in our minds. Yes, there are costs to transitioning. We can do this. We have the brain power within this country to make this transition.
Thank you so much. Okay, everybody holding up all right? Need a drink of water or something? Good, good, okay. During the COVID-19 pandemic, our governments committed to spending whatever it took to ensure the safety of our citizens. According to climate and economic experts, we would need to spend 2% of our GDP on climate action and green infrastructure, and another 2% on a just transition and social infrastructure to address our destabilizing climate and to ensure that no one is left behind. This would mean spending approximately $80 billion a year. Given the urgency of the climate emergency and our children's right to a future, are you prepared to support spending as much as it takes, an estimated $80 billion a year, to contribute to the global effort to avoid the worst of the climate crisis? Leah.
This is another yes. I absolutely believe the science, and I don't believe that we have a very long time to manage this problem. It's been put off and kicked down the road for so long by existing governments that we now are in a crisis situation. And this is not something that we're going to see just increase slowly. We are going to see big drops and big increases in problems with our climate in the next few years. We've seen heat waves and heat domes and flooding, and we're not out of the woods by a long shot. We absolutely have to spend at least $80 billion annually. Our GDP is in the trillions. 2% is a drop in the bucket. Yes, absolutely. This is something we must do.
Thanks, Leah. Blair.
Thanks, Brenda. I think I'm going to pull out this Buddhist proverb again. I've used this a little bit. Everybody knows it, I think. There is a proverb that says, if we're all facing in the same direction, all we need to do is walk. And that's a very true statement. I think Alistair used the warriors earlier on as a sort of an analogy with the climate crisis. At that time, everybody was all faced in the same direction. They had one common enemy that they were going against, and they were all committed to the cause. We are not in that situation right now. We have one of our major parties in Parliament that can't even get together to pass a motion that says climate change is real. So we are not all pointed in the same direction. there's a lot of people, I think, that are very concerned about what this is going to do to the economy. I don't disagree that there is no way. We have to keep going down this road, and we have to pick up the speed. But we but the basic part of the problem is that people need to start making different decisions. Right? We're still at that situation where not everybody has literally bought into this thing. Where we're all driving electric cars and alternate fuel vehicles. Sorry, because if we were able to fix even just the transportation problem, we would be able to reduce our emissions by 30% if just everybody was driving non-fossil fuel vehicles. But we're not there. Right? I know still there's people that are driving around $100,000 vehicles that they don't want to have to change by next Tuesday, and those vehicles become worthless. So we do have to get everybody all pointed in the same direction in order to be able to make quick progress on this, and we are not there yet.
Okay, thanks, Blair. Alistair, could you take the question, please?
Yeah, maybe just to begin by touching on the political problem that we have with the Conservatives, and the fact that they still very much, out of all the political parties in the House of Commons, are still somewhat reluctant to give credibility to this issue, to the credibility that it deserves. And to me, that sounds like a perfect argument for implementing electoral reform. Hopefully we could have had proportional representation in place had a certain promise been kept in 2015, because the vast majority of the political parties there do believe in climate change. And combined, we would absolutely have the power, the legislative authority to bring in the policies that we need. I mean, and when we talk about efforts, like look at Ford Motor Company and their production of the F-150. Last year, Ford sold approximately 900,000 F-150s, that one unit alone. And now they're transitioning to releasing the F-150 Lightning, the first all-electric pickup truck, which is a game changer. So I think we have the pieces in place for this revolution, for this great mobilization that needs to happen. And I think we need to approach the climate crisis as a war that we must win. We have to have that same kind of mentality that we did back in the Second World War, that we did at the beginning of the COVID-19. I think Blair makes a good point that we still don't have everyone facing the same direction, but the change is happening. I mean, as agriculture critic, I've spoken to very conservative farmers from the prairies, and they are now admitting that they are on the front lines of climate change and that things need to change. So, it goes back to that argument. The longer we don't address this problem, the longer we wait to mobilize resources, the more expensive it will be on future tax revenues, and a real depression on our economic ability to get through.
Thanks so much. Question number 6. Will you advocate for and prioritize funding for energy efficiency measures and the transition to renewable power generation, and do this over continued fossil fuel burning with carbon capture and storage technologies? Blair.
Thanks. I just want to, just switch back here a little bit. Alistair brought up proportional representation, which is way off topic, but I don't think that proportional representation should be used to override the wishes of 30% to 40% of the population.
Are you going to use your 2 minutes on this question on that?
I will. I'm going to switch over that. I just wanted to make that one quick point.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
So again, we are transitioning our economy during the next 30 years. I believe the energy efficiency measures and transition to renewable power is certainly the way to go. And I think that there's a lot of large companies that are looking at retooling and doing a number of different things in order to make that happen. One of them is, and we did this in 2020, where we funded a $40 million project with some steel plants in Hamilton to get them into a position of making green steel, which is getting off of metallurgical coal and getting them onto using electricity, arc welders, and all the rest of that sort of stuff, electricity and natural gas. And this will take the equivalent of 1 million cars off the road. This is a big thing. I would also say that, you know, as far as the carbon capture and storage technologies, it doesn't go hand in hand that because we have carbon capture and storage that we're going to burn more fossil fuels. I think that there's been a lot of work gone into carbon capture technology, and we are getting closer to a success with that. And I don't see that we should discontinue that. But you know, it's not because we have one, we will have the other. I think that we should continue with carbon capture because that might help us solve the problem. But renewable power generation is certainly the way to go.
Okay, thanks so much. Alistair.
Yeah, this is another question where you could potentially run afoul of provincial jurisdiction as established under our constitution. But I think the way around that is the federal jurisdiction that actually comes into being when you look at anything that involves two provinces. So if it's interprovincial, the federal government can get involved. We have made a commitment in our platform to help Canada to get to net zero electricity by 2030. And by 2040, we want to see 100% of our electricity generation be non-carbon emitting. So what does that mean in practical terms? I think that means that the federal government has to work with willing provinces to help them set up smart electricity grids that aren't just designed solely for one provincial boundary, but that work together. A couple of years ago, as member of parliament, I was really pleased to host a town hall on renewable energy. And in fact, one of our panelists, our guest panelist, was a professor from the University of Victoria. And she said that kind of a potential partnership already exists between British Columbia and Alberta. Alberta has massive potential with wind generation, wind electricity generation. And of course, British Columbia already has a massive existing hydroelectric capacity. So on the days when the wind is blowing particularly strong, Alberta could be trying to power most, if not both provinces through wind generation and allowing those hydroelectric dam reservoirs to fill up just as if they were charging a battery. And then on the days that the wind dies down, then you let the hydroelectricity take over. But that requires a smart grid where computers can tell where the energy demand is and which systems are working. And if we do something like that across the country, we can help those individual provinces get off of things like coal and burning gas to generate their electricity.
Thank you. Leah, could you answer the question, please?
Yes, we're talking about carbon capture and storage technologies, and absolutely there is a time and a place for federal and provincial cooperation, and also cooperation with every level of government. And that's why we need to create new communication systems. I was also looking at our constitution, Alistair, and understanding that the laws respecting various sectors are very clearly delineated. However, in section 3, it says that the authority of Parliament, nothing in subsection 2, which talks about provincial responsibilities, derogates from the authority of Parliament to enact laws in relation to the matters referred to, where such a law of Parliament and the law of a province conflict. So we really must build better cooperation and better communication systems between all levels of government. This is not something that we can continue to, shove off to the provinces or take on federally exclusively. This is going to take a lot of science and careful thought and incorporation of all of these technologies: solar, wind, geothermal, technologies that we may not even be aware of at this point, that our students coming up through universities and post-secondary education will enlighten us to. We need to be a very forward-thinking country in order to meet these climate targets.
Thank you. Okay, we're on question 7, so we're about halfway through. To combat the climate crisis, Are you prepared to, one, champion the implementation of emergency level actions, including creating new government institutions and emergency communications as part of your party's climate action plan? And two, push for a switch from incentive-based and voluntary policies to mandatory measures. An example of this is that the City of Vancouver has mandated that new buildings will not be permitted to use natural gas or other fossil fuels for heating as of 2022. Alistair, can I pass that one to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I'll start with the first question where, regarding what new government institutions and emergency communications we can establish. So in a previous answer, I had mentioned creating a climate accountability office, but I think we can also go further, and at the cabinet level and also at the Prime Minister office level, we can create, a climate emergency committee of cabinet. We can establish a climate emergency secretariat in the Prime Minister's office. And really, these are about bringing various ministries together and making sure that those individual ministers, when they are directing their staff, are working together to a set goal in mind. Because, having been in Ottawa over the last 6 years, I have seen too many examples where different ministries are sometimes operating on different planets, and there's very much that siloed thinking. So you need to nip that problem in the bud right at the cabinet level and at the executive level in the Prime Minister's office. I think we really need to employ a national crisis strategy. We can mobilize our young people through a civilian climate corps. So, really the federal government has a number of tools at its disposal, but I really do think it's important to lead by example and to show that, at the executive level of government, you truly are serious about getting all of the ministries, I guess, pulling the oars so that the boat is going in the same direction, and that there's not any of that siloed thinking. They're all very aware what, our goals are going to be in confronting this climate crisis, and that they're directing their senior staff to implement policies accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Blair, can you take that question, please?
Sure. As far as I'm aware, the the way that the Liberal government operates, before they went to this election, was that the climate was a discussion point on pretty much every initiative that they came up with. How is this going to affect climate? Is it going to move us backwards? If it's going to move it forwards? I think though, creating government institutions are only necessary if there's a need that is not being met. And I think as things progress over the next 10, 20 years, there will be different things that come along, but there has to be a purpose for them. I don't have a problem with what Alistair was suggesting with the climate watchdog type of role, that sort of thing. But just creating government departments for some unknown reason is not where I'd want to go. The communication systems, as far as emergencies goes, are in place. If they need to be upgraded or revamped, or something needs to change, I think that I would certainly be in favor of that. We have to keep up with making sure that these things are operational and working well. As far as mandatory systems go, that's not a word that a lot of people like in our society, or even in the world. We're running into issues with that right now, just with COVID, and it's in people's best interest to get this, and still they don't like the word mandatory. I think I just want to mention this as well. We have luxury in this province of having, pretty much all of our power grid is supplied by hydro, and even across the country, it's only 7% that is not. That is fossil fuel based, as in coal, and that is being phased out by 2030. But Vancouver, the rules that they make in Vancouver can't be applied really across the board, because the temperature rarely goes below zero. Places in Canada that doesn't happen.
Thank you. Leah.
Thank you. I'm incredibly impressed by what I see happening in the city of Vancouver, and indeed, in other parts of the world where, for example, Paris has mandated that all new construction have green roofs, and that in South Australia, I believe that it is now the case where solar is being put back into the grid by local individual consumers. So anything at this stage is possible if we change our lens from seeing everything in terms of GDP and the economy and blasting forward, giving only lip service to climate, greenwashing people into believing that we're all okay, everything's all right. You know, I'm not suggesting that we use fear as a motivator, but I think that the IPCC decision to release their report and call this an emergency was not done without due consideration to the fact that we have a highly educated population that is able to mobilize and is able to understand that we have to take measures to address not only our own existence on this planet now, but well into the future. This is a time when we must behave in a bold and assertive manner to mobilize our population.
Thank you. Okay, set up for the next question. Many Canadians are concerned that governments consider nuclear power plants and hydroelectric mega projects as green and clean, when their construction has a large carbon footprint and their inherent risks and environmentally damaging consequences are well documented. The question is, do your party's climate plans and targets rely on building new nuclear reactors or more hydroelectric mega projects? Leah, can you take this one? Sorry, I know you just spoke.
That's okay. This is my first no. Our party's climate targets do not rely on building new nuclear reactors or on more hydroelectric mega projects. We understand that there are other ways to move forward into a green future. And our policy, unfortunately, it was only just released yesterday, and I've tried to spend some time understanding all of the dynamics. But nuclear has been catastrophic in our past. We've understood that in terms of events like Chernobyl, we could have done things, and we have learned a great deal. I mean, we, in terms of science, has learned a great deal over the last few decades. However, we do not feel that nuclear is the way to go into the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Blair, can you take the question, please?
Sure. We seem to be running into a lot of this tonight, but you know, again, provincial responsibility. The federal government really doesn't have a lot to say in this, but I think, you know, and I'll speak on behalf of the provincial government, I guess. I think all provincial governments are looking at options to provide power to their citizens, including these options. And now I'm not saying that that's the way that they're going to go, but they are looking at all options, including solar, wind, tidal, you know, any number of different things to get these things off. As we transition off of oil, we have to replace an awful lot of energy, and with greener forms of energy. Most of the population in Canada needs heat in order to survive, and they don't want to spend a lot of time sitting in the dark. So they also need electricity in order to power their homes. So the push is on for the government to replace the 7% that we have right now that is fossil fuel, and they're I think those commitments have all been made. But as we transition all of our transportation off of oil and gas, there's going to be more demands on electricity, or to require electricity, and I think that you know, again, going back to the provincial governments, they're looking at at everything that is possible. I think we have to get away from this Ottawa knows best kind of attitude. The ideas that come out of Ontario or out of BC or even out of Prince Edward Island, I think are just as responsible and just as good as the ideas that come out of Ottawa. We would obviously be there to assist as a federal government, but the provincial governments are responsible to their citizens. They're answerable to their citizens, and it is their responsibility to do this. So I think that we would be there to help, but they will look at every option that is reasonable, I think.
Thanks. Alistair.
No, I haven't seen any specific mention of large-scale hydroelectric projects or nuclear for generating electricity. A big theme that I've been talking about over the last number of years is how do we build resiliency? It's usually been in the context of agriculture and our food security, but I also think the theme of resiliency can be applied to how we build up a sustainable energy grid. And the thing with large-scale hydroelectric or nuclear is you are kind of putting all of your energy eggs in one basket. And if a facility was ever knocked offline, or if some kind of a natural disaster occurred with a hydroelectric dam, that's a lot of money to fix, and it can leave communities without power for an incredibly long time. So I think, one of the commitments that we have made in our platform is to really try and support community-owned and operated clean energy projects at making sure that various communities around British Columbia are given the opportunity and the partnership to start funding local energy production. That can come in a variety of different ways. It can come through grants where we, employ the roofs on all of our houses with solar panels, using various small-scale hydroelectric facilities, tidal power. There are an incredible list of different kinds of energy that we can use. When it comes to nuclear specifically, it is important to recognize that does actually fall under federal jurisdiction. But and on the face of it, it seems like a miraculous energy source. It is carbon free, but as residents in Ontario will tell you, including many members of parliament that I'm colleagues with, there are great community concerns over what to do with the spent fuel rods and the radioactivity of those. So until we find a way to address that very real problem, I think nuclear needs to stay shelved for now, because that is something that many communities are very, very concerned with, and that we don't have an easy answer to as of yet.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, the last question from the national organization is this. In 2020, the Federal Parliamentary Budget Officer raised concerns that the Trans Mountain Pipeline could lose billions of dollars as climate goals are strengthened. Would you recommend and advocate for canceling the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion? Alistair.
Yes, I would. So I've made this quite clear a number of times when speaking about the Trans Mountain. I think it was a gross mistake for us to be investing, I believe, $4.5 billion to purchase the existing pipeline outright. And of course, there are estimates that are now going north of $10 billion for the expansion. I think that it's not only the evidence of climate change around us that make this this kind of a decision and this kind of investment in fossil fuel infrastructure the completely wrong direction. I also think that the economic case is working against it. The existing pipeline, a lot of people are talking about, opening up new markets in Asia. The existing pipeline, 99% of its exports are being shipped down to California. Even though we have that ocean access, we are still captive to the American market. And why is that? It's because we are shipping a very low quality, heavy sulfur oil. And currently the only refineries that are tooled up to process that bitumen are down in the United States. So there's no evidence that suddenly we are going to open up new markets in Asia. And in fact, because of the impending climate crisis, I do believe that the world is going to start doing massive shifts away from the use of fossil fuels. So we will see the demand for fossil fuels start to plateau and hopefully decline. And guess what? The first oils that are going to be on the hit list are those that are expensive to produce and expensive to process. Those are the oils that are unfortunately in Canada, and that's unfortunate for our industry. So we have to, rather than investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, we have to look ahead to the future, look at where the puck is going to be, and start employing that just transition strategy so that those workers have new industries to migrate to, and their jobs will be needed in that renewable energy economy of the future.
Thanks. Leah, could you answer the question, please?
Yes, I will just reiterate my answer from earlier and say, yes, absolutely. This is a project that should not go ahead. We are only really about a quarter of the way through completion, in my understanding. And yet already estimates, I think, Alistair, you're being extremely conservative. The numbers I'm seeing are about 20 billion to completion. This is not a project that Canadians loved from the get-go. In fact, there was a huge pushback, and I think that this has done a great deal of damage to Canada's reputation internationally as well, which is something that, as an MP, of course, we have to take into consideration. We have a role not only within our own population, but in terms of our relationships with every other part of the world, to be responsible in how we conduct our business. This is not a project that we need to pursue any further.
Thank you very much. Blair.
The TMX, gets blamed for a lot of things that it is not responsible for, and the pipeline itself is a transportation vehicle, really, which replaces the train and replaces trucking of this product from Alberta down to the West Coast. It is a safer way to move the product, and it's also once it's built, the transportation of that fuel now will not be garnering greenhouse gas emissions because it's just running through a pipe. So in 2015, when the Liberals got in, they decided that, look, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to, try to get the economy on side and the environment on side. We're going to do things right as far as getting, environmental approval on these sorts of things. And one of the things at that time, we were dealing with the government actually in Alberta, Rachel Notley's government, and sat down with her to do a number of different things that we wanted to get done. And one was getting a cap on emissions out of the oil sands. That was important to the federal government. We got that. And one of the other things was getting a carbon tax into Alberta. We got that. And in exchange for that, one of the things that, not in exchange really, but one of the things that was on the table was being able to move their product out of Alberta to the West Coast to be able to export that product somewhere else other than the US. And so this was an agreement that was made in order to try to get the western part of this country on side with our climate goals. And that's why it was established in the first place. That's how we ended up where we are. And it was to get Alberta on side. Now, after the Conservatives got back in Alberta, things have changed there again, but this is an important project for that part of the world.
Thanks. Okay, that brings us to the end of the national questions. So now I'm going to pose for you the 5 questions that have been generated from the residents of the region. Again, for each question, I'm going to ask that you keep your answers to 2 minutes or less. The first question is this: recognizing that transportation causes around 1/3 of Canada's climate pollution, the Capital Regional District is calling for a shift in federal and provincial funding away from highway expansion and towards public transit, walking, cycling, and rolling infrastructure. If elected, will you press to shift funding away from urban highway expansion and instead to direct these funds to public transit, walking, cycling, and rolling infrastructure? Blair.
Well, thanks for the question. You know, we live in a part of the world where a lot of people want to be, right? And we are going to see increases in our population over, you know, forever, I'm guessing. But, and so we have to look at a whole bunch of different transportation systems. I am certainly in favor of the ENN Railway going ahead from Langford down to Victoria. I think that's a project that we could get off the ground with federal funding. There is some infrastructure there that, you know, rail line basically that is there, which needs to be upgraded, obviously, but it's not as a huge expense as trying to get over the Malahat. And what slowed this project down for the last 12 years is the insistence on all the politicians on the island that this thing has to run from Victoria up to Campbell River before we say yes. And I think I'm kind of an incremental guy. I think the first step is to get it from Victoria out to the West Shore. And then the next step would be naturally to get it to Duncan and then to Nanaimo and up island. I don't have a problem with walking, cycling and rolling, but there's a lot of people that doesn't work for, and we're going to have, you know, more cars, and we have to figure out how we're going to get them around, and with the infrastructure that's required, you know, the cycling and rolling and all the rest of that sort of stuff doesn't help people that are commuting into the Victoria area for work. So we're going to have to still consider roads as a possibility for transportation, but there's other things that we can do, as in the ENN Railway.
Thank you. Alistair.
Yeah, I think that the federal government absolutely does have a role to play in trying to avoid the ever increasing or widening of our nation's highways, and so we do need to look at a variety of different options. I think it's really important, though, that in order for these alternate transportation systems to be effective, they do have to meet people's needs. So you have to understand how people in your community are moving around. What are the times that they are going to work? What are the times that they're coming to home? What are some of the major arterial routes that everyone's using? Because right now we do have an infrastructure system set up that is heavily reliant on single occupancy vehicles. Now we can address the climate crisis in a large way by absolutely trying to speed up the rollout of zero emission vehicles. But I think also we do have to work on making those mass transit options much more palatable and accessible and working according to people's schedules. So I would agree with Blair, and it's something I've advocated for in terms of the railway. I think it makes sense to start by getting the West Shore to Victoria section of that railway up and running first. I think it's the most economically viable, and then start to move up the Malahat and into the Cowichan Valley. But I think the advent of the e-bike is also a game changer. It allows people to enjoy cycling without working up a sweat, so that they don't arrive drenched when they come to the office. But we need to set up cycling infrastructure that is separate and apart from our roads so that people feel safe. So absolutely, there are a variety of options where the federal government can be active, but it has to be done in a smart way, in very open and transparent communication with the affected communities to make sure that it's meeting people's needs.
Thanks so much. Leah, please.
This is another yes for me. Absolutely, I think that there are alternatives to highway expansion. And of course, this question is focused on the Capital Regional District. But of course, as we look through our entire riding, we have to take into consideration that we have people on the west shore of the west coast of the island that are already dealing with minimalist kinds of highways and 2 lanes and sometimes 1 lanes if I travel out towards Fairy Creek. There are a number of situations where we need to look at livable, locavore lifestyles where people don't have to be constantly on the road to get the services and goods that they need. And so this again is an area where we can work in collaboration with architects and city planners and provincial governments to look at all of our infrastructure needs. Most of the people that I have met so far in this campaign, and of course, thousands more that I've known through my life here on the island, acknowledge that our population here was aging. We were kind of behind the tweed curtain in Victoria for a little while. And now, of course, as Alistair says, people want to come and live here from everywhere on Earth. We have a relatively mild winter, and we have to acknowledge as well that our tourism sector is probably also going to need to access transportation. We've talked before about using the rail corridor that has existed since Mr. Dunsmuir to facilitate movement of goods, but also to be used for cycling and hiking at the same time. We need to restore our tourism sector. It has been gravely affected by the pandemic in the last 18 months. And we need to look at local, livable towns and cities where people can get the goods and services that they need without having to drive to Victoria or go to Vancouver to obtain those services.
Thank you very much. Next question. Although the western screech owl and marbled murrelet are protected under the Federal Species at Risk Act, their habitat in the coastal rainforests is being destroyed as a result of the industrial logging of old growth ecosystems, such as Fairy Creek here on our riding doorstep. What actions will you and your party take to advocate for the enforcement of habitat protections for endangered species? Leah, let's start with you.
Well, this is an area where I have looked carefully at Sarah, at this legislation, this federal legislation, and I've realized that there are in British Columbia approximately 15,000 species that have been identified. I mean, not only just owls, but larger mammals, all the way down to different kinds of fungus and creatures that live in the forests. Again, you know, people have often said that the forestry sector is a provincial responsibility. And yes, indeed, in the Constitution of Canada, that is where it falls. However, when we look at our relationship with not only the creatures that are inhabitants of these forests, but also the entire ecosystem and the indigenous populations that make up our riding, we know that we need to do more to protect each and every living thing. Yes, there needs to be restrictions in terms of nesting, seasonal restrictions in terms of forestry. And yes, we need to look more carefully at what's happening not only to the animals, but the entire biodiversity in these forests.
Thank you very much. Blair, can you take the question, please? Can't hear you, Blair. You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm sure everyone listening to this has heard the protests of Fairy Creek and how distressing that situation is for everyone involved. While forestry is a provincial responsibility, the Liberal government recognizes the urgency and the strain the situation has put on so many and has responded with an announcement of the BC Old Growth Nature Fund to the tune of about $50 million. $50 million pledge is intended to bring all parties together, the provincial governments, First Nations, local communities, and workers to develop a plan to move forward on protecting old growth forests and by extension, the habitat for species at risk. What you don't know about me likely is that my wife and I regularly support the North Island Wildlife Recovery Center. the Mars Animal Rescue Hospital and Wild Ark, all of which help animals that have been hurt or displaced, often by human activity. Given my personal view and my position as Liberal MP, you can take it to the bank that I will be one of the parties involved in discussions made possible by the Old Growth Nature Fund. And I will be there to ensure solutions respect the Species at Risk Act. Thanks.
Thank you, Blair. Alistair.
Yeah, this is a great discussion on this particular topic. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you look at various federal statutes, whether it's the Species at Risk Act or the Federal Fisheries Act, you know, the language is very plain in there in terms of, you know, how we look after various species and habitat, and also what enforcement mechanisms do exist. Where there's often a gap, though, is the actual enforcement of the act and the will to really make sure that these particular things are on a government's radar and that we actively have people in the field making sure that the applicable federal act is in fact being enforced. You know, I think back to the first parliament that I served in from 2015 to 2019, and one of my colleagues was Linda Duncan, who was a member of parliament for Edmonton Strathcona. And for years, Linda, you know, she's a staunch environmentalist. She was an environmental rights lawyer. She introduced private members legislation that was hoping to enshrine a Canadian environmental bill of rights to actually give communities the right to enjoy a healthy environment. And I think that's something that we need to look at bringing in and adding to what already exists through the Species at Risk Act. In our party platform, and for me personally, I am absolutely committed to enforcing the Species at Risk Act and making sure that we are pursuing a nature first agenda. So making sure that we are identifying those parcels of ancient old growth forests, you know, and our pristine coastal habitats, and ensuring that we are slowly but surely adding federal protections to them, because that again is an investment in our future and making sure that future generations have those special places preserved and protected.
Thank you so much. The third question in this series: if elected, will you work to protect BC's remaining old growth forests and to secure the federal portion of the roughly $1 billion needed to transition forestry practices in BC to a sustainable second growth harvest? Alistair.
Yes, the federal government can play a role in this. So, you know, I think it's already been acknowledged that forestry practices do fall under provincial jurisdiction. So a lot of this debate also has to take place in the provincial legislature, and it's what our MLAs have to take responsibility for. That being said, I think there is particular room for identifying those Indigenous-led stewardship initiatives, especially in ancient old growth stands. There has been federal money offered. We've made a commitment to put on the table $500 million to make sure that we are investing in trying to protect those particular stands. I think we have to understand that, you know, and I'm speaking from my experience as a former tree planter. You know, I spent 8 years in the wilds of British Columbia replanting forests, and I know for a fact that, you know, it takes many, many years to replace what was cut down. And for those ancient old growth ecosystems, I mean, you're dealing with trees that were seedlings back at the time of the Magna Carta. You just simply cannot replace these ecosystems. So we have to recognize the value in them being preserved and protected, and that there's much more value in them remaining standing. So I think Indigenous First Nations on whose traditional territories these ancient old growth stands are located, they have to be put in a leadership position. They have to recognize that there is going to be a willing, able, and full federal partner in helping them realize these stewardship initiatives. So absolutely, this is something I can support.
Alistair. Blair, can you answer the question?
Sure, thanks. You know what, as I mentioned before, the the Liberals are supportive of a collaborative system where, with regards to old growth forests and harvesting with the development of the old growth, with the Old Growth Nature Fund. As Liberal MP, I would certainly be at the table to help facilitate solutions that support and respect First Nations, local communities, and the workers. One of the problems that I have with this whole thing, though, I got to tell you, is the local communities, as in Lake Cowichan, Dubo, Honeymoon Bay, Port Renfrew, and the Pacheedaht Nation, and so on, seem to be left out of this argument a bit. And I think that this is sort of an area that was founded by loggers, and there's a lot of people out there that are still in that industry, and they've managed those forests very well over the last 100 years. And now I want to make sure that they don't seem to get pushed aside in this conversation that we're going to have on what's supposed to happen with the old growth forests. And I think at this point they're feeling left out. As a member of Parliament for this area, I would certainly be involved in that discussion, and would make sure that the local view is represented at the table.
Thank you. Leah, over to you.
This is another yes question for me. The $1 billion that is needed to transition forestry practices, I'm not exactly sure where that number comes from, but my understanding, again, to repeat the other candidates' remarks, is that this is a provincial jurisdiction. However, I think that if we look at this in terms of a bigger picture, and that is through the justice lens, we have to understand that forestry is important as one of our resources in this country, and particularly on this island. It has sustained a number of families for a very long time. Practices of road building, however, and destruction of mountaintops, which are critical to watersheds and to biodiversity, need to be taken into consideration. And also when we look at what is happening right now in Fairy Creek, and this afternoon at the legislature in Victoria, and these protests have been going on for well over a year trying to protect these areas, we need to acknowledge that from a justice lens, we need to intervene federally. We need to have conversations about how to better manage these pristine valleys and mountaintops. And we need to do this in collaboration and cooperation and consultation with Indigenous communities. I have been very dismayed that the provincial government has seemed to divide and conquer the Didadat and Pacheedaht nations in terms of who gets to have the final call. And I would hope that we can do a much better job. And as the previous justice critic, I would have hoped for a great deal more in terms of an intervention.
Thanks, Leah. This next question may lead you, there's some duplication here, but to the comments that you've just made, but I will give you the tee up. First Nations are title holders to vast tracts of land and have generations of experience with sustainable ecosystem management. Yet government and industry continue to push for the extraction of resources and the development of these lands, primarily for the benefit of others. In place of litigation challenging First Nations, how would you promote meaningful recognition, preservation, and the exercise of First Nations rights and title to support a return to Indigenous regenerative ecosystem management practice? Leah.
Well, again, this is a very complicated question because on Vancouver Island, there is still so much unceded territory and so much provincial dispute and federal dispute about who actually is in charge of what. We talk about Crown land, we talk about Indigenous territories, we talk about watersheds, and there's so much overlap. What we could do, and what I'm hoping that we will be able to do in the very near future, is encourage Indigenous communities to send their young people to universities and post-secondary education, not only to learn, but also to share cultural practices so that we can come to a more meaningful conversation, so that we can work together on a path forward. This is not something that is a top-down administrative decision. This is something that we must all work together on collaboratively.
Thanks, Leah. Alistair.
Well, I think, you know, maybe just using Fairy Creek as an example, given that, you know, the dispute is happening within the riding of Cowichan, Malahat, Langford. I think it's really important to go back to the declaration that was made by the Pacheedaht, the Dididat, and the Hoo-ay-aht First Nations. There were 6 signatures on that declaration, 3 of the elected chief councillors and 3 of the hereditary chiefs. And I think they have made it quite clear that the old way of doing things is now over. They have sat on the sidelines for over 100 years while governments and resource extraction companies have had a say with what goes on their traditional territories. And they've made it very clear that there's going to be a new way of doing things. They have very respectfully asked for the time and space for them to develop their stewardship plans. And, you know, if we're talking seriously about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we have to understand that that document is not meant to be selectively applied. So when it comes to the fact that First Nations are rights holders on these lands, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to give those 3 nations in particular the time and space to develop their plans. They have made it very clearly known that they would like the time and the space to develop this. What can we do from a federal perspective as the Member of Parliament? Well, we can approach those 3 nations and let them know that, you know, the federal government is there as a willing and able partner, that we are prepared to offer short-term funding to compensate them for lost revenue, that we are prepared to offer medium-term funding to support them in consulting with their membership and developing those stewardship plans, and that there will also be long-term funding to help them realize the vision that they are developing.
Thanks, Alistair. Blair, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that, you know, with the Fairy Creek situation, it's one of those perfect examples, I guess, where, you know, the province has handed over, you know, or given back basically the rights to those forests to the local First Nations, and then the population, or a big part of the population from not even on the island now, is suggesting that the province should move in there and tell the Pacheedaht and so on what to do with these lands. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. We've gone that step. We've moved that the rights to those properties over to the First Nation, and then we can't really tell them what to do after that, especially not when we just did it not that long ago. So. But I think what we have come up with which is this $50 million fund to help ease the situation and get things back to some state of normalcy out there, and to allow the local First Nations to come up with their what they would like to do, and give them some time to do that is great. I think one of the problems with these things is always, and I think this question usually goes back to the blockades of the rail lines and that sort of stuff, where, you know, the resource company or whatever company is working in the area has made an arrangement with the local First Nations people that this is what they're going to do, but somebody on the First Nations doesn't agree with it, and then they are the ones that are setting up the blockade. And, you know, we can't ask for unanimous consent on absolutely everything. We have to go to the leadership of the First Nation and say, what can we do? How can we get an agreement? Do we get the agreement put together? And that should be the final word, really. because like in a democracy, as everybody knows, it's you put leadership in place in order to make decisions, then they make decisions and you should live with it. So.
Thank you. Finally, in response to public protest, the province of Alberta has passed a bill to limit peaceful protest, and the BC government has turned a blind ear and eye to unlawful behavior by the RCMP as defined by the BC Supreme Court. What specific actions would you or your party take or advocate to protect and ensure the people's right to peaceful protest? There.
Sorry, was that me?
Yeah, you.
Okay, so sorry about that.
It's all right.
Yes, I'm, you know, I don't have a problem with peaceful protest. When we look at the situation on Fairy Creek, I think it passed peaceful quite a while ago. We've had 800 approximately arrests out of that area, and it's civil disobedience at this point because they're ignoring court orders and all the rest of it. So I'm not in favor of certainly of allowing that there, but peaceful protest is fine. I'm not sure about Alberta's law because I don't follow the province of Alberta very closely, but I'm sure it's targeted towards something that they're expecting. Perhaps I'm not sure, but civil disobedience, you know, it passes on off of peaceful protest. From what I understand today, even over Fairy Creek, they're almost digging people out of foxholes that they put in because the things are filling with water. It's become a ridiculous point, and that the protest out in Fairy Creek is political, it's well funded, and we have to say that that's not the way that we should negotiate things in this country.
Thank you. Leah.
Well, the question addresses the people's right to peaceful protest. And yes, Fairy Creek is very close, not only in terms of proximity, but also to the hearts and minds of many people throughout this riding. And in fact, as Blair suggested, to many people who are coming from all over the place to stand in solidarity with the forest protectors. It is true that our right to peaceful protest is enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it guarantees a freedom of expression and association and peaceful assembly. It doesn't protect riots, it doesn't protect harming other people, but this has escalated to a point now, if we look at Fairy Creek, to a point where my fear is that someone will die or be maimed, and this is not where I'm hoping this will go. We have had courts tell us that there was an injunction in place, and then we had other decisions made regarding exclusion zones. And now the police are being brought in. I've also worked in law enforcement, Blair, and of course I have many friends and family who are members of the RCMP. And I feel that they are being used. They are being used as industrial barriers, facilitators. And my concern is that this has to be a stand down situation. This has to be back to the table. This has to be a situation where we protect lives. And I stand in solidarity with the land defenders. I will not be volunteering to be arrested, but there are, as you say, more than 866 people as of my last tally who have been arrested.
Thanks, Leah. Alistair, finally to you.
Well, you know, I think the individual RCMP members, they are hardly in an enviable situation, and I'm sure if you were to ask them what they would rather be doing, They would probably rather be in their home communities, doing what they do best, which is keeping our communities safe, patrolling the streets, and assisting citizens who are in need. Um, they are not in a great position. They are there following orders. It is a court order, and they have a job to do. That being said, though, members of our police forces are necessarily held to a higher standard because of the authority they have, the use of force that they are allowed to carry out in the performance of their duties. And so there have been some disturbing video footage placed forward, and I think those individual incidents, whether it's through the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, they do deserve a follow-up, and I believe that further federal follow-up could be warranted. The RCMP as a force certainly have had their fair share of problems, across Canada. And I think the force as a whole, through review of the RCMP Act and review as to whether we need further civilian oversight of our national police force, I think that's warranted. And that's an area where, as a member of parliament, we can be effective, because the RCMP Act is a federal statute. And so that kind of long-term review and systemic change will require Ottawa's intervention. And that's something I'm certainly committed to.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over, Jane, to you. Do you have questions that you want from the participants who've been listening today?
We have a number of questions, and Beth has been monitoring those. So I think she is about to appear and offer us some questions.
So it's 10 to 9. I mean, maybe we have time for 2 questions, Beth, from your list. With apologies to those people who don't get questions on the floor.
And can I ask you, Beth, if you got any questions yet from Jeff, who's monitoring the Facebook Live?
Yes, I went to Facebook
Okay,
Live and I've
great.
got one question.
Great.
So there was somebody from Facebook Live and from our viewers who asked this question: will you commit to bringing in proportional representation to ensure we can achieve our GHG targets?
Thanks, Beth. Alistair, do you want to take that one first, please?
Yes, absolutely. This has been a long-term commitment, not only of the NDP federally, but of myself as a candidate. I really think we need to reform the way we vote in Canada. And the first past the post system rewards parties for regional power bases. It allows you to try and grab a majority with as little sometimes as 36% of the vote. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The reason why the Liberals launched this election this year is because they are trying to convert their minority into a majority, because they don't feel like they want to work with other parties. They made a commitment in 2015, and had that been honored, we would have a system in place where I believe political parties would view each other not so much as adversaries, but as potential partners. It would allow for better democratic engagement on the big issues like climate change. And I think it would allow us to, actually bring in policies that are going to tackle these problems. So what we are proposing, because we want to remove the politics out of this question, is we are proposing to form a national citizens assembly that will come up with recommendations for the type of system that we want to employ. Rather than having a referendum on that system, we believe that we should take the approach that New Zealand did. I'll use the metaphor of buying a car. You don't buy a car without having taken it for a test drive. We believe that in changing our electoral system, we should give Canadians the opportunity to put it into practice, then hold a referendum, and they can choose as to whether they want to continue with the new system or go back to the old system. That's the way a referendum should be employed. But absolutely, my commitment to changing our electoral system is unwavering, and it's something I will continue to fight for if I'm re-elected as your member of parliament.
Thanks, Alistair. Leah, do you want to take that one, please?
Yes, absolutely. I have long been a proponent of proportional representation and spent many days and nights advocating for it when it was put on the table briefly. However, I think that what was missing in our last effort was education. People simply did not understand what was being asked of them. And in spite of flashy, publications coming around through the mail and so on, it is a different kind of way of doing business. And when people understand that the principle behind proportional representation is that all views are valued and all voices can be heard, I think there will be buy-in across the board. I think that, in my career as a conflict resolutionist, if you like, doing mediation for years and years, the win-win approach serves everyone best. There doesn't have to be winners and losers. We can all work together.
Thanks, Leah. Blair, please.
My opinion is exactly the opposite. I'm not a fan of proportional representation. I wasn't a fan, but I was a Liberal member back in 2015 when this was brought up. They looked at it in Parliament in 2015 and decided that there was no way that they could get the parties together to be able to put this through. So it was just dropped. But there's a lot of, first past the post system works very well. Everybody understands it. One of the problems with proportional representation is, oh my God, you're trying to figure out how is it that this gets here and there. It gives way too much power to the political parties, as far as I'm concerned, because it puts the leader of the party in the position of appointing a number of MLAs that they get because of their percentage of the vote, right? So we're appointing people as opposed to having them elected, and I just absolutely disagree with that on a whole bunch of different levels. But that's what great thing with democracy is you can support who you want to support. But I'm not a supporter of proportional representation at all. So,
thank you, Blair. Beth, the final question over to you.
Stephen Rickley asked, there are near-term climate impacts affecting seafood safety and security due to marine heat waves, algae blooms and biotoxins, ocean acidification, and more. What kinds of supports can you imagine that will help ensure our coasts continue to support healthy marine ecosystems that produce seafood?
Leah, do you want to take this one?
Well, I wish I'd paid better attention in my science classes. That was a really good question, but let me give it a shot. One of the things that I found so devastating in these last couple of months is the heat dome's impact on ocean on seafood that is a primary source of nutrition for First Nations communities. And of course, there has been acidification of the ocean to such an extent that many of the harvesting areas that are critical to our First Nations brothers and sisters has been severely impacted over the last decade. Taking out ocean-based fish farms is well overdue, and I know that we are on the road to doing that. Aquaculture on land is a far safer way to produce food. Canada is a source of food not only for our own population, but for the world. And this is a critical issue. Of course, we don't have a lot of influence on what happens beyond our marine borders, but we do have a voice with the G7, and we do have a voice internationally in holding each other to a higher standard. And we can model that behavior right here in this riding.
Thanks, Leah. Alistair.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because so many of the impacts on our ocean environment are coming from beyond our borders, and you know the ocean is influenced by many different things around the world. So you know when you're looking at it as a whole, it can seem like the problems are insurmountable. That being said, though, I think, you know, if we are going to have a successful aquaculture industry, I absolutely do support us moving to closed containment land-based systems. I mean, one of the benefits is that you can carefully control the temperature and the environment in which shellfish and fish are grown. So that is one benefit, and also the technology is evolving so that that type of a move is now becoming commercially viable. And I think it's also just incredibly important for us to get farmed fish out of our wild salmon migration routes. What can we do closer to home? Um, I have personally participated in Cowichan Bay in eelgrass restoration projects. I think that's incredibly important at, you know, bringing back to life, you know, aspects of Cowichan Bay, at providing that nice sheltered habitat for young fish. I think locally also, you know, managing to secure those important federal dollars for eventually raising the weir at Lake Cowichan, that's going to make sure that we can hold more of that cold lake water supply back for those really dry and hot summer months, because environmental flows are incredibly important to our river system. And if we have that adequate flow rate of the Cowichan River, so even in the parts where it's emptying into the estuary, that's going to be incredibly important at temperature regulation and ensuring that our young fish have the ability to move back and forth between the estuary and the river.
Thanks, Alistair. And Blair, I think, remaining for this question.
Yeah, thanks. Boy, this is certainly outside of my field of any expertise, that's for sure. But I think it is as a result, as we know, we can identify the problem as a result of our changing climate, that things are changing in the ocean, and that is going to have some impact. I do know that we have committed to getting the farmed fish out of the water and on land, which is a good way to go. I think we can make a good industry out of that up in the northern, certainly in the northern part of the island, with land-based systems, and we will likely solve a bunch of problems with that. But it all gets back to climate change, right? And what can we do to slow the impact of climate change or reverse the impact of climate change? And that's where you know, what we've been talking about tonight. How are we going to get there? We know that we know where we're going. We know what the problem is. There's a lot of different ideas on how to get there, but I think we have to do it again as we make a plan on how to do it, and follow the plan and do it as quickly as we can. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Blair. Okay. For those of you listening this evening, I hope that you have heard things from your three candidates that will guide your voting choice on September 20th. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank you for spending the time with us. To the candidates, to Alistair and Blair and Leah, who've taken the time this evening, I would like to thank you very much, each of you, for your thoughtful responses, your personal and party commitments, and most of all, for your willingness to engage in fulsome dialogue about some pretty critical issues of our time. We wish you well in the 2+ weeks of campaigning that remain between now and September 20th. And may September 20th give us all the leadership that this country so urgently needs to tackle the many issues that are in front of us. So thank you all. God bless you and good night.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yes,
And
thank you very much,
thank the
Brenda.
organizers. Good night.
Good night.